Understanding Identity and Access Management Concepts. Here are your Do I Know This Already questions. So pause the nugget, review them. If you know the answers to all of them, it's probably safe to move on to the next nugget in the series. Otherwise, let's get started. Let's start off with the big picture. IAM is essentially user and permission management for all things AWS. When you first start off with AWS, you create a master account. It's kind of like the root account in Linux, right? He's the guy with the credit card, and he can come in and do anything he wants in AWS. It's his credit card. He should be able to, right? Create resources, destroy them, tune features, tweak it. I mean, essentially everything AWS has is at that guy's disposal. And AWS says, great, start it off, give us your credit card, and then put that dude on ice. Don't use that account anymore unless you have to. Go and create a sub-level admin with limited privileges. He's a Cyclops. So maybe that admin account, maybe the first thing that you do as you learn this is you say, you know what, that guy can access everything except the billing. He doesn't need to worry himself with what it costs and all that kind of stuff. And then from there, you create your multiple administrators, with whatever needs your company's had. Well, that guy can access those EC2 instances or just the DNS and Route 53 and all those kind of things. So you create all the multiple admins you want under one account. Awesome. Creates accountability, creates limitations, security. I mean, that's what IAM is all about. Now, very similar to IAM, and I want to mention it here so you know this feature exists. It's very handy, but not the same thing, is consolidated billing. So IAM is multiple admins under one account. Consolidated billing is actually multiple accounts, one credit card. Right? Perfect example of that is CBT Nuggets and me. CBT Nuggets is hosted out of AWS. The sound that you hear right now is streamed from an AWS server, which is cool to know. But then they have me. They're like, we don't want that guy loose in our AWS account because he's going to blow us up and take CBT Nuggets offline. I mean, I'm doing demos all the time, creating DNS records, spinning up EC2 instances. I mean, all the time. But thankfully, they've put my account under CBT Nuggets, so they pay for everything that I do. Every instance I create, every instance I forget to turn off. So anyway, IAM supports multiple factor CBT Nuggets review team. I do not forget to turn off my instances. IAM supports multi-factor authentication. So I should emphasize there's a lot of stuff that does that. But the beauty about AWS is it's so easy. Meaning that's like click, download an app to your iPhone, and bam, you've got multi-factor authentication. And what that is, it's not just username and password security, but essentially when you go to log into your account, you bring up your iPhone app and you see that thing spinning. You've got like Google Authenticator is one of the most popular ones. I keep saying iPhone because that's what I have. Android, whatever, if you use one of those. You can get that too. But Google Authenticator allows you to, every 60 seconds the password changes and you type that in as yet another layer of security. You can get a key fob shipped to you. There's all kinds of ways to do this. The cool thing is, again, it's so easy to do. Finally, IAM gives you those granular levels of control and automated policy creation. What does that mean? Well, I think the best way to explain that is to understand the elements of IAM. So you can access everything IAM just by jumping into AWS and clicking on that Identity and Access Management. And when you do, you'll see over on the left-hand side, you have essentially these groups, users, roles. Let's talk about those. Users. This is what I've been talking about the entire time. You have that master credit card bearing account user that starts the whole thing, and the first thing you do is go in and create a sub-level user. I'd name mine Jeremy. And then you grant that user whatever permissions you want inside of AWS. Now, it's worth mentioning that these things have no permissions by default at all. It's not like they get some kind of default set of limited access. I mean, they are dead on arrival until you go in and grant them. I don't know why that's funny to me. You go in and grant them some level of access that they can use within AWS. Now, these can be used for users or services, meaning maybe I don't create Jeremy, maybe I create www.auth, some user account that I've assigned to my EC2 server. So when a web user comes in and authenticates to my website using whatever internal database I have, they then proxy through this user to gain access to whatever, some S3 buckets, or essentially whatever resources in AWS I want them to have access to. It could be a service account. And that's why, and this is worth mentioning, these accounts have usernames and passwords that you can create for them. They have multi-factor authentication that you can use for them. But they also have, it's called a key ID. Have you seen this before? And a secret key ID, right? So when you create a user, matter of fact, let me bring this back up. So I'm in IAM, and I'll go to my users, create a new user, and let's just call him Larry. Now notice right below that it says, do you want to generate an access key for each one of these users? It's an option. You don't have to do this, but watch what happens when you do. Comes up and says, show me the user security credentials. There's our access key ID and the secret access key ID. Now imagine going up to Larry and saying, hey Larry, when you log into AWS, just remember your username is AKIAIRD, and by the way, your secret ID, XJ5. He's going to be like, okay, this is obviously going to be on a post-it note somewhere around his keyboard. So that's why this is not something that we are designed to use as human beings to authenticate. This is for API access. Back to the whole root of what started this discussion. On that web server that we created, this web authentication user, inside of the script or whatever triggers a call to AWS, to put files into an S3 bucket, or again, whatever that web server is doing, accessing a database, we would supply embedded on that web server the key ID and the secret key associated with this www auth user, which grants some kind of proxy rights, if you will, to that server. So that, and by the way, that is one way that we can do it. We'll talk about more in just a second. Now these are quantity limited by AWS. I think right now, to this day, out of the box, you get 5,000 user accounts that you can create. Now, obviously, that's a large number, but imagine Netflix, who is an AWS account user, or Dropbox, who relies on AWS. You think they have more than 5,000 users? Absolutely they do. And what AWS is saying is, we do not intend for you to create IAM users for your website services. So for instance, Dropbox.com is not going to have you sign up for an account and I say, oh, my name is Jeremy Chara, and I fill out all my account information, and they have a call, because I mean they could, but it's not designed to go into IAM and create a user account in AWS for me. No. AWS is like, hey, IAM is for essentially what you want to do in AWS. It's administratively based, right? It's not designed, although you could, it's not designed to be used as the database for all of your users. Use your own database for that. So that is the user account. Now let's talk groups. Actually, much simpler. All this is a collection of users. And my user, now smiling because he has access to something, can be a member of multiple groups. And so maybe I have group 1, which grants access to S3 resources, and group 2 grants access to DNS resources, or again, whatever permissions I assign. I can assign my Jeremy user group membership in both those groups, and he automatically inherits those permissions. And I want to also, and I'll mention this, you can't nest groups. So I can't put the DNS group inside of the S3 group and grant permissions that way. Instead, you create user accounts that you put in multiple groups. I want to take this as a brief moment to give you a preview of where we're going. Just because you create a user or a group does not mean they have permissions. You still have to assign permissions through policies. We'll talk about that in just a second. But before we do, let me talk about roles. Roles is AWS's answer to an age-old problem. I just gave you the example of creating a service account, right, which generates a key ID and a secret key ID that we then put on an EC2 instance. We embed those credentials on the server, and that grants it access to whatever resources in AWS we assign that user account to, right? What's the problem with that? Well, that's true. It's how we've done that for years and years and years and years. But the problem with that is we are embedding that on a web server. So first off, we need to change that on a regular basis. So that means either A, an admin is getting involved and manually going in and changing all these, scheduling an outage window while he goes to the instances and updates the key ID and all that. Or maybe you go fancy and you even create an automated script that weekly creates a new IAM account and then runs a script that accesses each one of your instances and changes that manually. I mean, that's awesome and all, but that's a lot of work for an admin to figure out how to get these rotating credentials. So what a role does is remove the user element out of it. Think of the role as like a jacket, right? You create all of these different jackets. I did not practice this before. So you create all these different jackets, and let's just say we've got jacket number 2, so I don't have to draw that again. Jacket number 3. These are the different roles, and we grant permissions to all these different jackets. Now, you can then say, well, I want these elements, and let me explain. Let's just start with the user. I want this user to be able to take his jacket off and access one of these other jackets, which gives him a whole new set of permissions. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're like, well, isn't that a group? I mean, couldn't you use that same analogy to describe a group? Well, yes, but a role can be assigned to far more than a user. Groups are typically, you put users in groups and you assign groups to permissions. That's traditional security from age-old times, right? Now we have this thing called a role, which, for instance, we can assign it to an EC2 instance. I can have, instead of embedding credentials, I can say that EC2 instance, which is identified by some wacky, AWS code behind the scenes, that EC2 instance actually puts on this jacket itself. So if I remove that jacket from the instance, it no longer has the permissions. Or essentially, I can say anybody that authenticates to that user and that server makes a call because I've encoded inside of that server to use these AWS command line tools to make calls to specific resources, it automatically, because it is this server that has this role on, this jacket on, it can do this. I mean, you can apply this to users as well. You can have a user log in, and when he actually has a little drop-down selector that he can say, you know what, I want to put on the role of Route 53 admin, right? And so he puts on that role. Now, immediately, all of his old permissions that were assigned either directly to the user or because he's in groups disappear. He took that jacket off. And he just put on a new jacket, and that allows him, it's kind of a messed up jacket, it allows him access to Route 53, and while he's in that role, he can do what he needs, and then he can take the role off. So the role, it's very similar to a group, but it allows you to apply it to more things than just a user. Think about external users. Here's a scenario. Let's say you hire a company to come in and manage some elements of AWS for you, right? You can actually, in that company, maybe that's what they do. They are AWS Management Incorporated, right? And you've signed up with them. We want you to monitor our Cloud Watch and make sure that if something blows up, you take action on it or whatever the case is. You can actually create a role for that user, and they can generate what's called an external ID. I'll just put EID. And you take that external ID and say, okay, that user has access to this role. Now we're not creating a user account for them in our system. Essentially, they can create whatever user accounts they want, and we just give them that jacket for whatever time we're in this agreement. If we ever want to, we can go in and delete the jacket. We can remove that external ID from the jacket, and now they lose access to our system. Federated accounts. And I mean, this list could go on. I'm just giving you some cool examples of this. Federated accounts is maybe you have your own directory. Maybe you're running Windows and you've got Active Directory services running in there, or you're running FreeRadius on a Linux-based system, or whatever LDAP-based user accounts you have, or whatever your database is. You can actually have that database integrate with IAM through roles. So you can have essentially this guy make a call that when let's go back to the Dropbox scenario. When Dropbox user X comes in, where you manage all those accounts, and does such and such, it automatically grants them through a role access to an S3 bucket, which is defined for that Dropbox user, and et cetera, et cetera. Let the story unfold from there. But this is your way of allowing these elements and more. Again, go on AWS and search for what can roles be used for. You see all kinds of things that you can use roles for that go beyond the typical user and group scenario. Okay, policies. This is where it all comes together. Essentially, you can do this, this, and this all day, and you've got nothing. Nothing but a bunch of configuration elements in AWS that have no permissions to anything. So policies are what you use to grant access. Now, first thing that I want to make sure I mention is that you in AWS have user or resource-based permissions. So user permissions is what is typically referred to when you're talking about policies, but there are some things like take an S3 bucket. Right? You can go to an S3 bucket and grant everyone, meaning the public world, access via www to a certain element or some directory or all of a certain S3 bucket. So that is going into the S3 bucket and granting accesses from there. Those are known as resource-based permissions. So not all elements have that, but some of them do. But the main thing I'm talking about here is user-based permissions done through a policy. Policies are JavaScript object notation based, or JSON. Is a lot of stuff is in AWS. If you are going to succeed in AWS in the long term, you got to start getting familiar with JSON. And the good news is it's not too bad. I'm going to give you an example of it in just a second. Matter of fact, let me do that right now. This is an example of a JSON IAM policy. I pulled this straight off of the Amazon website. I was like, oh man, what a perfect example of this. First off, you'll get used to the JSON look and feel. You'll see it again and again and again as you get into AWS. It's actually not too bad at all once you get used to it. So first thing I want you to catch here is that we have multiple statements. 1, 2, 3. You don't have to have that. These are 3 entries in a policy, but usually you will because it's a lot of work to create a whole bunch of policies for all these specific things. So best way to get this is just to kind of dive in. So let's look at statement number 1, right? This is this guy right here. The first thing that we see is you see the statement. This is essentially what starts the policy. A brace, and I'll mention this again, means multiple configuration elements. Here's our 1, 2, and 3. Those are our elements again. The SID is the description. It's optional. You don't have to use it, but essentially it will tell you. It's like documenting your code. It kind of tells you what this does. In this case, they said first statement. You could put, allow change password or deny change password, or whatever the case is. So you can see that this SID is the first statement, optional. Effect is one of 2 things: allow or, you guessed it, deny. Right? What do you want this to do? In this case, it is allowing, and then we have to say, well, what are you allowing? That's the action, right? I am allowing, and this is where you get into a lot of the in-depth AWS elements, and understanding these elements are going to be so huge when you get into actually writing these policies, which they have an automated way. I'll show that to you in just a second, but again, let's just look at the code for now. So I'm saying in the IAM element, I want to allow the change password. So that is what I want to do. Combine that with the effect. So I'm allowing a change password in IAM, and then we say where. That's the resource. Where is essentially asterisk. What do you think that means? Anywhere. Which initially you're like, wow, that's a big policy, right? That allows somebody to go in IAM, everything that we're talking about, and change the password of, well, everything. Which initially is like, yeah, that's a pretty big admin account that you're creating right there. Well, it's actually not as brutal as you think it is, because the change password element, or action, I should say, is defined in AWS as something that applies to personal accounts only. So the fact that I'm granting this to everybody is fine and dandy, but essentially this change password says, okay, but this element or this action is always restricted to the personal user account. So essentially I'm allowing any user to change their password. But oh my goodness, can you tell why this is so critical to start understanding these? Imagine if it was reversed. Imagine change password really did allow you to change any password, and this star means everything, but you assumed otherwise, right? Imagine you assume, you're like, well, I wouldn't think they would allow any change password, so I'll just put that in, and you accidentally grant a sub-level admin access to change anybody's password. That obviously understanding what these things do is a huge part of being successful with assigning these permissions and policies. So that's statement number 1. So statement number 2 in this same policy says, okay, second statement, that's the description, allow. Now we're focusing in on S3. So we're saying, I want to allow the S3 command list all my buckets, right? I love AWS and how direct they are. I'm like, well, that one, yeah. So resource is now saying anything. So when you look at that action, you go, okay, well, that means I can go anywhere in S3, because the command is limited to S3. That's an S3 command. And list all my buckets. So you can imagine that one shows you all the buckets that exist in S3, right? Now, it doesn't allow you to modify them. It doesn't allow you to delete them or create them or anything like that. This is just list them. You can see them. That's how granular these are. And I should say the key word in IAM is granular. And it continues to get more and more granular. I mean, sometimes I wonder if they're going to have a policy where they're like, yeah, you can allow people to create users in IAM, but I want to be able to restrict them that they can't use the letter E or F. I don't like those letters. You know, I mean, it's silly, but it almost is to that level of granularity where you can break it down. So, third statement. Let me clear this up. Third statement right here is allowing, now check it out. They're saying the action, so the action is, now notice the brace. Remember I said up here, brace means multiple statements. So we didn't need it right here because I said the action was one thing, or resources, one thing. But I'm saying, okay, the action, I'm going to give them a couple actions they can do. They can do S3 list, and they can do S3 get, close brace. So that's a list of 1 and 2 actions, right? And then I'm going to say, okay, to the resources, and then notice next brace. So multiple resources. I'm going to say they can do it to this folder, the confidential data folder, and then they can also do it to anything, what? Within the folder, right? Because I'm saying slash and then star. So anything underneath that confidential data folder. Now this is known as a Amazon resource name, or ARN. You'll get again more into this. This is just kind of a big picture. This is what it looks like to do this kind of thing, right? So Amazon resource name, and we actually spell out all, essentially each one of these is a potential where you could put more stuff in there to specify exactly what you're looking for. But in this case, we just said that's the folder, and anything within the folder. I want to be able to list it, and I want to be able to get it, which is download it. Okay. Last piece of this this whole thing is the condition. The condition essentially says, I put a condition on this entire policy. The only way that you're getting these commands is if you actually use, and this is one of, again, many conditions that you can apply. You can say, if you're in this group, if you're this username, if you, this is like a big if then. If you used multi-factor authentication, true. Essentially, if you used MFA to get into AWS, then this can apply to you. But otherwise, I'm sorry, if you don't meet that condition, maybe you're a role, maybe you're a group, maybe something, then you're not going to get these permissions. You can see now why I said it's dipping your toe in the JSON water. There's obviously a lot more around JSON that you can get into. And I can tell you, just a gut level feel, just do it. Meaning, don't sit and say, okay, I've got to learn JSON code. Okay, the bracket, the parentheses, the star. And you start, I mean, you can just get lost in JSON and just totally lose your motivation. Just do it. When you are confronted with, it's time to create an IAM policy. Oh, I forgot I was going to show you this. When you're confronted with, it's time to create an IAM policy, then just go in there and start doing it. Or, this is what I was going to show you. Go into the policy generator. Let me give you an example of that. So let me just throw a group up there, ASDF, right? You can see the next thing it's going to do is give you this selection of permissions. Now AWS, they're like, hey, we want to be kind to you. There's all kinds of permissions that you can assign. Look at this. Down this thing where they say, okay, this is for SQS, this is for Route 53, this is for Lambada. Again, this list goes on and on and on to where you can go in and assign very broad, common levels of permissions just by saying, I want that one. But what I'm talking about is I'm talking about JSON. Go to the policy generator. It's like that. And say, okay, I want to see what it looks like to generate a policy for S3. Right? It says, okay, well, what are the actions? Now, these are all of the actions. Now, again, think action. I just showed it to you in that JSON example, right? These are all the actions that you can apply for S3. So you can say, well, and I mean, a lot of them are just named logically. If you ever have a question, just type one of these things in Google, exactly as it's spelled, put AWS in front of it, and you'll get exactly what it does. So, obviously, create bucket. That's a nice simple one. And it says, okay, what is the ARN? You're like, well, how do I do that? And right there, it explains ARNs and goes through, okay, okay, that's what it all is. So that's what separates all the different colons, and they give you examples. So this is what I mean when I say just do it. You just want to get in there and start, specifying different things and say, okay, well, let me see what that statement is. And you can go through And hang on, where am I thinking? Okay, adding conditions is the conditions at the bottom of the thing. You go to the next step, and you can actually see the code that it generates. So this is where you're like, oh, okay, I get it. Okay, so JSON, we have to start with this and this. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, they put a version every single one of the JSON engine that they're using here, the statement. We got the break. Okay, so you see what I mean? You can really put together a lot of elements just by going through and generating some policies and seeing what it looks like. You now understand the IAM big pictures: users, groups, roles, policies, and even a little bit of JSON. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.